Without further ado, obviously, everybody, thank you very much for your patience as we've navigated the internet waters here, but glad we're all able to come together today. My name is James Hosworth. I'm the Global Managing Director for Privileged Access Management at Cyderes. And Tony, I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you, James. Yeah, my name is Tony McDonald. I'm a machine identity sales specialist here in the Mid-Atlantic territory that works with the core CyberArk AEs.
Fantastic. So we'll, again, without further ado, we'll just jump right into it, right? So obviously the overall, discussion topic today is around kind of the 47-day mandate. What does it mean? What are the steps we can take today versus tomorrow? Things of that nature. So, Tony, I'll kick it right off, with a
Mhm.
question for you. If you could just kind of explain the 47-day mandate, how you feel it's going to change how organizations, prioritize and manage machine identities compared to maybe a year ago.
Yeah, no, it's a great question because, I was just at a trade show, InfoSec the other day, and this was a hot topic that came up, right? And everybody's like, there's a lot of people that don't know why it's here. They're like, well, why are they doing this, right? They think it's a vendor thing that we're pushing for, right?
Right.
This is really being mandated by the CA and Browser Forum, which is the governing body around certificates and how they should be configured and dealt with, right? They came out and they said, hey, we know quantum computing is right around the corner, right? And today, certificate size is, 2048 is the recommended size because it provides the best security and performance for that size, right? That can be hacked. They're saying now by 2030, they feel that quantum computer will be able to break a 2048 certificate or key, right? Which is 30 times faster than what initially estimated, right? So that's the driving force behind this, right? And that's why because the longer you have a key or a certificate that's out there, the more likelihood that it can be cracked, right? So right now, if we think back many, many years, I think my hairline can show you that I've been in the industry a while, right? Certificates for like 5 years, right? Yeah, we'll put it out there. We don't need to worry about it. Nobody can break this thing, right? And it's been slowly decreasing over the years. Right now, we're at 13 months, which is like what 396 days or something like that. Come March of next year, it drops down to 200. In March of the following year, it drops down to 100. And then March of 2029, the validity period drops down to 47 days. So for all intents and purposes, you're doing it one time a year now, and pretty soon you're gonna be doing it once a month, right? And the main thing is the shorter period of time that you have a certificate out there in the wild, the less likelihood of it being compromised, right? And
Sure.
that's the reason behind it, right? Now, how it affects customers, if we look back 6 months ago, a certificate life management solution, a CLM, was a luxury item, right?
Right.
Because that I can track it in spreadsheet and calendar reminders. That may be working. I may hit an outage every once in a while because I missed a calendar reminder or I missed something on a spreadsheet, right? Now when I need to do something every month and I have 500 certs, we use 500 because that's a good number, right? Um, Now that's 500 times 12, right? And then if you put a growth rate on top of that, by the end of the year, it looks like you have like 6,000 certs, but you really only have 500, but you have to touch it every month, right? And that doesn't scale, right? So automation, I use the word survive this event, right? You need automation now. It's now a mandatory item in order to avoid what I like to refer to as a resume generating event, right? Where like some bad things happen and you need to look for a new position, right? And so I think that's where we're headed, right? You have to have automation in order to work with this, right? You can't use spreadsheets, you can't use calendar reminders and operate at scale. Yeah, if you have 20 certs, you could probably get away with it, right? Because it's something that's easy to do. You could do one per day throughout the course of the month and you'd be fine. But when you have hundreds or thousands, you have to have automation. It's the only way you're going to be able to get through it at the end of the day.
No, that's completely fair. And I couldn't agree more, right? Even across the board when it comes to identity security, the story that you shared earlier around, yesterday, it was easy to just kind of treat managing certificates almost the same way that you treat a reminder on Outlook, right? It seems that all areas of identity security have kind of gone through that transition over the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, I remember a time when I was still, hands-on when I was working on the client side of the house where PCI DSS was just starting to or enforce rather MFA requirements and things of that nature, or make that a requirement to avoid a finding. And actually even vaulting basic privileged credentials and cycling them or having that capability internally was almost considered bragging rights on a golf course versus now obviously it's mandated that credential cycling is happening and things of that nature. And obviously we see that with machine identities and certs. So, with that being said, right, when we talk about the non-human identity space overall, there's a lot of confusion around defining that and explicitly
Oh,
understanding what does machine identity mean versus a secret versus a token versus a traditional service account. So, how would you define machine identity and kind of marry that term with these new requirements that are coming down leading up to the 47-day mandate?
yeah, we categorize identities here at CyberArk as human, AI, and machine, right? And I think there's a distinction between AI and machines, right? Because AI is doing a little bit, has more logic built into it where it can make decisions on its own, where machine identity are, web servers, firewalls, load balancers, right? Those are the ones I think of almost every day because those are internet facing. But we also have, card readers that are internal to my environment. We have internal servers. We have printers. We have voice over IP phones, because it has an IP address and all that stuff, right? When I talk to customers, we talk about external PKI and internal PKI because the CAD form changes are really focusing on TLS and SSL certs that are internet facing, right? The stuff that's on your internal environment, usually protected by like ADCS or zero touch PKI, which is our offering, are not being mandated to a 47-day because they're behind a firewall and they're protected, right? They're not internet facing, right? So it's the internet facing things. But what's interesting is about a year ago, they said the ratio between a human identity and a machine identity was like 40 to 1. And I just Googled it this morning just to see if it's changed. And now I'm seeing it's 82 to 1. So for every one human, there's 82 machine identities on the network that need to be protected, right? And so where we see them all over the place, but the ones we focus on, the ones that we care about right now, I mean, we care about them all, but the one that had the more sense of
Sure.
urgency, right, is this 47-day thing. That's what I'm talking to customers. I'm like, hey, why are we having this conversation today? Are you guys taking outages or what? And they're like, no, this 47-day thing, we got to get ready. And I'm like, okay, cool. So the conversation has changed from what it was 6 months ago to now, right? But it's, hey, I have internet facing web servers, I have internet facing servers, I have load balancers and firewalls. I need to protect all those. And how do I do that? And right. And those are the conversations that I'm having today. And that's kind of how we define the space um, from the machine identities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a brand awareness consideration as part of it as well, right? Obviously, from a security perspective, that's our focus, but what organization wants a client trying to come to their, website or do, interact with them in any way and getting a cert error, right? That speaks a lot, up to the organization. There's a lot of implications that can be made by a prospective customer, for example, that has a lot of downstream effects, right? I mean, even on the SIAM side of the house, everybody's worried about orphaned carts and things of that nature. Well, something that can significantly drive a client or a prospective customer away from an organization is seeing what they may perceive, correctly or incorrectly, as an easy security control not being enforced, right? So,
Oh, yes, right. Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Complete side note, I'm a woodworker and I'm looking for some lumber. So I went to the Sawmill's website and got a certificate error on their website. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. Well, I guess I'm not shopping with them. And so
Right,
I moved on with my day, right? Went to a different sawmill. So
exactly.
it's not often I run across those, but they happen every once in a while in the wild, right? And case in point, they lost a customer. So
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really important, at least to me personally, when I'm speaking to organizations about this myself, I'm like, hey, understand that the downstream effects of this are also critical and maybe not obvious, but they will still have a negative effect on your business. Maybe not as much as getting actually compromised, right? But if you lose 5% of your business over a given year because clients are having issues with navigating your website to be able to purchase things due to cert errors because of these new requirements and things of that nature, that's an impact, right? And
absolutely.
candidly probably pays for the ability to manage these things automatically in and of itself. Uh,
Yeah. So, wow.
So do you see, I mean, I think this is pretty obvious, but just to be clear for everybody, right? Do you see that being the area of greatest growth for machine identities is in that internet facing side of the house, or do you see it growing more, internally?
We see it both, right? Obviously, the compelling event at the moment and what everybody is, or the impending event, I should say, is the cab foreign changes, right? And we know that based on our experience, customers can successfully automate 20 to 30% of their environment year over year, right? So the sooner you start, the better, right? So we know the 200-day change is happening in March. That doesn't mean in March everybody's got to change their certs out. It means come March 15th of next year, if you have to renew a cert, it's only going to be good for 200 days. Okay,
Sure.
so they don't, and not everybody has to renew by then. It's just anything after that will be only good for 200 days. So you're going to have a mix, right? But we also see customers looking for a more modern internal PKI solution, right? Not to put a dig on ADCS or anything. It's been a great platform for many, many years, but it's getting long in the tooth and it's not really being updated that much. And they want something that is and finding PKI expertise is getting harder and harder, right? And so they're like, boy, I really don't want to manage this environment anymore. I'm looking for something that's more modern. And so they'll come to us and say, what do you guys have? Well, we have a SaaS-based offering. And so we take care of all the day-to-day care and feeding and you can just go on with your day-to-day work and do business revenue generating activities instead of trying to maintain some old platforms. So we see the growth happening both internal and external, but they're very different conversations. One is, hey, how do we stop? I don't want to say stop the bleeding, but you got to help us because we know we got the cab foreign changes coming and we got to get in front of this now before we have a problem. And the other one is, hey, we want to modernize things, right? So one is obviously more critical than the other from a priority standpoint from the customer.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
And I think you brought up a good point as well, right? That the expertise to just bring somebody in to be the PKI SME. I mean, that's a very, very small pool.
It
And
is.
candidly, when I was still hands-on years ago on the client side, nobody wanted to deal with that, right? So we're already
Right.
talking about a task that most people don't want to deal with. Uh,
Yep.
that is now, it always was critically important, but now there's actual revenue ties for it, motivations and things of that nature, applied to an already, important security control. Which to me, when I look at the challenge too, especially on the internal side, to be fair, is it's not just that it's not like this is a challenge that just got to us, right? There are just tighter controls to it, which means and implies that there's also a significant amount of technical debt that organizations used to be able to kind of shunt off a little bit, add it to the risk register. We'll eventually get to it, but we can get by right now. To now, to your point, with March coming up and the expirations on these certs being significantly less, it's we need to address, those new requirements coming down the pipe, but we also need to keep in mind that there's a significant amount of technical debt and a lack of skill set that maps to addressing that. So to your point, the answer there, of course, is how do we introduce automation here? How do we do more with less or more with the same resources we currently have? And generally, it's a technical control that comes in
Mhm.
to fill that gap, at least in my opinion. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, though.
You're not wrong, right? Being delegated to, I always find that it always ends up in the networking team's hands, the PKI responsibilities. Whether they want it or not, they have it. There's somebody that knew how to spell PKI, and so that person was responsible for it now, and it's a subset of their job, right? It's not their full
Yeah,
job, and that
additional duty. Yeah.
there lies the problem, right? Is as we get closer and closer to 2029, if you don't automate, you need multiple people where that's their full-time job, and you're never gonna keep anybody if that's all they're doing every day is updating the certificates because who wants to do that all day long, right?
Working through the spreadsheet. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Um, so that's why automation is very important. And like I said, it always, for some reason, lands in the networking team's hands. Obviously, security and compliance want to be involved in part of that conversation, right? Because there are controls, and and speaking of that, depending on the company and their processes, you should really be looking for a solution that can provide what I'm going to call a self-service portal that you can build controls around, right? To say based on who you are, what application group you belong to, you can request a new certificate or a renewal of a certificate, and it will automatically go get the cert. It'll push the cert, it'll bind it and restart the services. It's cradle to grave kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Or you may have more controls in place that says, okay, based on what application group you are, maybe this is extremely critical to our business. It needs to go through these checks first to get approvals along that process before the automation can continue. To your point about having controls in place, right? And so as customers look at solutions, it's important to understand what are my controls? How comfortable am I with automation, right? Because there's always that thing is, yeah, we want automation, but nobody turns it on because they're afraid of it, right? And so by
Sure.
being able to put controls in place, you can get more comfortable with it. And then pretty soon you can just kind of let it do its thing because you know what it's doing, right? So, and did I answer that question or did I tap dance too much?
No, no, you answered the question, right? Um, so obviously, we kind of talked about some of the risks a little bit, right, around, the upcoming requirements not meeting them, things of that nature, which kind of exposes a much larger problem, right, which is unmanaged machine identities just in
Yeah,
general, right?
yeah,
Obviously, we want to be able to get these certification or certificates under management, make sure that we're handling their expiration dates, but obviously that starts with situational awareness and having that kind of positive control over them. So with all that being said, as far as a motivator to continue working on this and chipping away at it, what would you say is the largest risk posed by these, unmanaged machine identities, maybe beyond just the risk of an outage?
yeah. I mean, that's really the driving factor, right? Is it's wildcards, and I understand why customers use wildcards, right? It's a cost savings
Sure.
from the certificate authority. And depending on how well your spreadsheet maintenance is, you may or may not know where all your wildcards are. I have a customer I'm working with. They have three wildcards that are deployed in like 400 locations, three certs, right? And so if that one cert expires and they missed a dozen locations, they're taking outages, right? Are they all documented, right? And so that is the big fear, right? You don't have a good inventory. If you don't have a mechanism to scan your environment where you can discover all your certs, right? Look at all, and then also look at all the CAs. And maybe there's a CA that some developer went out and got an arrangement with and is getting certs for a domain that's not one of your primary domains, right? So you want to find a solution that can scan the internet and look at all of those ports essentially from the CAs and see, hey, are there domains out here that we own that have certs on that we weren't aware of, right? And then where are those certs in my environment, right? So not only being able to scan my internal environment or not your internal environment, but from the internet facing your organization and scan and find all those TLS certs and then scan all the CAs, you can get a good understanding of what your posture looks like and where all those certs are. So you don't have any unexpected outages for those rogue certs that could be out there, right? Because those are the ones you need to be concerned about. And you'll find them in time. It's kind of like walking to the data center and going, where does this cable go? I don't know, let's unplug it, wait for somebody to call. We've all done
Smoke
it.
test. Yeah.
We've all done it, right? That's kind of what you're doing. You're just waiting for that thing to expire because you don't know where it is. And, okay, found it over here, and it just cost us $100,000 for the day to get this fixed because we didn't know what the problem really was, right? And so that's what we're trying to avoid, right? So when the customers look for a solution, the scanning of the inventory from the internet is extremely important so you understand where you're at from that standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. So, as we're looking at this, obviously this change being what it is, this new mandate coming through, it doesn't
Mhm.
represent obviously just a point in time change. This is really kind of a paradigm shift for a critical aspect of the non-human identity space. So,
Yeah,
to me, that implies that there needs to be an overall organizational strategy with a lot of stakeholders involved in things of that nature versus simply, a small group of people trying to tackle this massive challenge, right? Given all of the individuals that are affected. So, with that being said, right, when you're building a security strategy, obviously it's critically important to identify the right stakeholders. So, from your perspective, who would be the key stakeholders in any given organization, right? Regardless of vertical, right? Those common stakeholders that you would want to bring in, because I imagine that's a little bit that could be unique given the external facing nature of this particular challenge, right? It could be, not your normal security stakeholders, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not to point out the obvious, the CIO and the CISO,
Sure.
extremely important in that conversation. But you're also going to be looking at um, somebody on the networking team is going to care about this, and then somebody on the security team is going to care. The application owners, they care, but they don't, right? And they care in the sense that, hey, I need a cert. I don't care how long it's good for. I just need a cert. And they're usually part of the process, right? It's somebody that's managing that for them. Maybe somebody from the networking team that says, hey, here's your cert. Oh, thank you, right? So they care to a certain extent. And that might be the conversation you're starting with to say, hey, did you realize your cert's only going to be good for 47 days? How are you going to get new ones? Especially if you don't know who else to talk to, right? Um, and so that's kind of where we always start is usually somebody in the networking team is the person that is gonna own the keys to get that thing going. And then we're gonna pull in the appropriate internal stakeholders that they deem necessary, right? The VP of infrastructure, the VP of security, or whatever it may be, right? That's typically how the people that I work with anyway.
No, that's fair. And I would
Yeah.
say too, especially with a lot of organizations leaning in towards this kind of fusion approach, especially in the fintech and banking industry, and I've seen a little bit in the healthcare side of the house where they're trying to basically ensure that all telemetry everywhere related to security, including the identity context, thankfully, non-human and otherwise, is being brought into the SOC so they have a better understanding of what right looks like for all forms of authentication transaction, whether it's human, non-human, token, cert, etc. Um, so the only thing I would add to that is it definitely makes sense for an organization when they're building out this strategy to include those folks so
Yeah.
that we can understand what our new indicators of compromise look like, for example, and how sharp can we get around these certs. So instead of having wildcards that are spread across, God knows how many things in the environment, well, now that we're shifting more towards explicit, non-human identity, explicit
Mhm.
issuance of these certs and management, well, now we're significantly sharper on what right looks like and where these certs should be used, where not, the trends, things of that nature, so the SOC team can be better prepared to deal with things, proactively, or at the very least, if they're reacting, they can react a lot quicker, even including, automating response in the event of some sort of, indicators of compromise and things of that nature, so that the whole team can be ahead of any challenges. But obviously, all of that starts with being included in the conversation, cross-functional education between your traditional SOC personnel, your traditional identity security personnel, to your point, traditional network personnel who are generally tasked with managing these certs. um, my position would be that it definitely makes sense to build sort of a steering committee, not to try to create barriers to progress by any means, but something built in parallel to make sure that as you're dealing with this issue, that there's a select group of people that are empowered and candidly informed enough to be able to make decisions in real time, to be able to keep up with the increased operational tempo required for certificate lifecycle management now versus years ago. Again, to your point, where you kind of look at it as a reminder and outlook that you can hit snooze on a million times over and it's completely okay because that cert doesn't
Yeah.
expire for 3 more years, right? Um,
I
it's
had a customer I was talking with. They called it somebody else's problem because they're all the internal certs for set for 5 years. Says that's somebody else's problem. We don't have to worry. We don't have to talk about it right now. But back to your point of consistency, right? And I mentioned like a self-service portal before, and part of that is this CSR process, right? When you're requesting certs, um, a lot of cases, somebody in the networking team may have to fill out the cert or the CSR because the application teams or whoever always makes mistakes on it, right? Well, by
sure.
having a portal where you can hard code things and limit their choices as to what they can select. Oh, you can only select a PEM format or a CSR format or whatever it may be, right? You limit that. It's always 2048. Here's the address, right? That everything should correspond to. So all they got to do is type the name of the application in. You provide what domains are relevant, right? You can only use these domains, and then issue that, right? So that helps reduce a lot of those how to scope things that break things, that delay things, right? Because historically, the security team has always been the break. The business wants to go fast, and the security team's always like, "Well, hold on a minute here. I'm not comfortable yet. I got to make sure I understand this process, right?" But by building automation and integrating in with your dev teams, you can help move at the speed of business by enabling them, right, and making it easier for them to get the certs that they need. So by having those processes defined ahead of time and hard code them into a self-service portal, um, that's where your speed comes from, right? And then obviously you leverage APIs and things of that sort to help get certs much quicker. And then when we start talking about velocity, we're talking about Kubernetes, right? That's a whole nother creature that's starting to creep up, right? And at a lot of organizations, the Kubernetes workloads are not internet facing, right? So they're going to fall into the internal PKI. But you're going to find that there are a lot of organizations that the Kubernetes workloads are externally facing. And now we have to not only do we have to address how we manage the certs in that environment, how do we manage speed, right? Because there can be latency issues, right? If I have to go back out to my parent CA essentially to get that cert, that can delay things, right? So there's all kinds of things to consider. I know that's kind of outside the scope of 47 days, but it's kind of popped into my head, right? But to your point of having a steering committee and understanding how we should define our processes and what it should look like, maybe tedious up front, but ultimately it's gonna speed things up, right?
Oh,
Smooth is
100%.
slow. Yeah, slow is smooth and slow is
Smooth is
smooth.
fast.
Whatever the saying is, right?
Yeah, slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
There we go.
Um,
So, yeah.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. You got to going from playing whack-a-mole with people who have, the paddle in one hand and they're trying to run everything else with the other to a self-service conveyor belt with, obviously the left and right limits baked in where people can just go, "Yep, I need that," and go back to work. 100%. You have
Mhm.
to make it everything is a sliding scale of hard when it comes to identity security, as we all know. But the easier you make it, the more self-service, the more automation improved, the easier it is to get people to adopt. Because at least in my opinion, identity security is at least as much psychological as it is, in behavior change as it is technical controls. But I think, bringing up the internal challenge with like Kubernetes, for example, I think it is important to talk about that, right? Because at the end of the day, whether it's anybody on this call with us or anybody, out in the world, so to speak, that may see this in the future or talk about it in the future, you have to sell this to an organization, right? You have to sell the investment of time, personnel, obviously, tooling, things of that nature, and being
Mhm.
equipped to discuss the downstream positive effects of addressing this immediate problem appropriately, right? I think it's critically important because there's a lot of organizations that I've talked to that really want to shift more towards cert-based auth across the environment as much as they can. And obviously, addressing the 47-day mandate the appropriate way also arms organizations to start seeing those downstream benefits as well, with a very similar approach with the same technology, things of that nature. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different position?
No, I would agree with that for sure because, hey, if I'm going to start building a process for something, I want that unified across my entire environment. I don't want to have, it's easier for me to just have a cookie cutter versus one off for everybody, right?
Sure.
And so exactly to your point, right? Now is the time companies are starting to think about that a little bit versus, oh, it's somebody else's problem conversation, right? Hey, let's unify everything now. And so we know exactly what everything looked like. We're not surprised that, oh, something expired. We didn't know it was going to expire. You know what's going to happen because everything is the same, right? And that is how you achieve success. You can't have one-offs for everything. It's just not going to work for you, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, all the benefits you get from managing external certs can definitely transition downstream to internal in many ways. Maybe not one for one, right? But there's definitely a significant amount of value offered downstream of handling, this particular challenge. And obviously, especially looking at, the CyberArk identity security ecosystem, as you and I both know very well, right? There's a lot
Right.
of dual use capabilities within the platform that can not only handle, the challenges that we're facing, like this one today or coming in March here, but also internal issues, internal technical debt that can be addressed as a result of the good work of taking care of challenges that exist today. Uh,
Mm.
so obviously, regardless of how we mince it up and what directions, we kind of look at it from, right? At the end of the day, this is a sliding scale of hard again for organizations, right? It's a challenge that everybody is facing, just to one extent or another from a scale perspective. So with all that being said, what can organizations begin doing today? Right. I talk to orgs all the time that look at this as a huge problem. They kind of get sucked into analysis paralysis and don't really necessarily what to do or know what
Yeah.
to do, rather. And can't make a decision around it in many ways because they have a million and one other things to be concerned about that are also considered critical security risks, even outside of identity security. Right. So, what are
Yeah.
the steps they can take today to prepare them to tackle this challenge that are realistic?
I think they need to be honest with themselves, right? And get a grasp of, hey, how many certs do we really have, right? And there's tools. We have a calculator that you can plug in. Here's how many certs that you have. Here's your growth rate. Um, here's how many hours it takes to to reissue a cert, right? And a percentage of time it takes, the percentage of time allocated for my employees, right? And it'll tell you based on this year, next year, all the way up to 2029, what you're going to need from a resource standpoint, right? So I think that's a great place to start because we talk about it, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And when you get a graph that says, hey, you got 500, but by 2029, it's going to feel like 8,000. Okay,
Mhm.
oh crap, I didn't really understand that because now I'm gonna have to do it every month, right? Then they're like, oh, the light bulb clicks on. I need to do something, right? And I had said earlier that we know that customers can safely automate 20 to 30% of their workloads year over year. That means the sooner they start, the more likelihood they're going to be successful by 2029, right? And depending on what your growth rate is, you could be just automating and growing at that same rate, and you're never really getting ahead. So my comment to customers is, look, waiting does not help you at all, right? Because I get you don't have budgets, it wasn't a budgeted item, but you have to be honest with yourself and say, look, this is how many we have. We don't have the manpower to do it today, let alone in 2029 when we need to do it every month. We need to start taking steps moving in that direction, right? And the first step would be look at one of the calculators, right? Engage a company like CyberArk, right? And start having a conversation around what does this thing look like and what's the true value it's going to provide to me, right? We have people that can come in and do a true ROI for them. That it's not just a marketing ROI, it's a real ROI. They sit down and understand your environment and show you this is exactly what it's going to do for you, right? And if you don't do it, we know what's going to happen, right? You're going to take outages and it's not going to be good for the organization professionally or personally, right? So I think that's really the first step. And I just want to throw one other thing out there is
Sure.
as you look at solutions, we all look very similar on PDF and PowerPoint, right? And then I encourage customers to go out and talk to others, right? But there are differences once the rubber meets the road, right? And the main difference is around automation, right? You want a solution that leverages REST APIs for automation and not Acme scripting, right? And the reason I say that is Acme scripting is going to be non-centralized. It's going to be a script for every device you want to automate, right? So now you got to manage that. And then if it breaks, it's you to fix it, right? Whereas if it's a REST API, it's centralized and the vendor's there to help you if there's a problem with an update that breaks an API call, right? And so I encourage you to do your testing and don't just look at price tags and go, oh, this one's cheap, this is the one I want, right? Because at the end,
Sure.
you got to ask yourself, is it free like a beer or free like a puppy, right? Because we know puppies are not free, right? And they always cost you in the end. Um, and that's what that can look like, right? And so that's just, I'm not here to plug product or bash on anybody, but you have to go into your research eyes wide open and understand and not just look at marketing material, right? You have to play with it, test it, and understand what does automation mean to that particular vendor, right? Because there is a difference. And if you go one route, it might not save you the time you thought it was going to save you, and you're kind of in the same boat that you were anyway. Um, so that's my 2 cents on that part. So
No, absolutely, especially with obviously how quickly the mandate is coming down, but also the volume of the challenge continuing to explode. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if next year we Google this, right? And we're looking at 100 times or 150 times, et cetera. So I
We
would,
can't, at the rate with quantum computing and the availability of it, it wouldn't surprise me if it gets that validity period gets smaller and smaller by 20, by 2035, who knows what it'll be,
oh,
right?
sure.
So
Yeah,
so getting built for it now is the thing you want, right? And you want a solution that also has um quantum formats, quantum key formats in it too, right?
right.
Not just your standard formats that we use today. So um there's a lot to think about, but now's the time to get on it. You can't wait till next year, right? If you're somebody that likes to go to the gym, you're always like, oh, leg day was yesterday, right? You never do legs. You can't do that here. You can't ignore it. You gotta bite the bullet, sit down and start working through it. And we have workshops. They're free workshops through the CyberArk University. It's a 3-day instructor-led workshop, 1 hour a day that gets you keys on handboard, gets your keys on your fingers on the keyboard. There we go. Walking through the solution so you can play with it. So it's a minimal investment, but you can see what the solution can do for you without having to do like a full-blown POC and days and weeks of time spent hammering through use cases, right? So things like that can be a great jumpstart within an organization to show them, hey, this isn't as hard as we thought it was going to be. Look at these cool tools and look what it's going to do for us. And we're going to have time to work on these other revenue generating projects that the business wants us to work on versus over here updating certificates, right? And so that's something to be considered as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't a challenge that people can afford to just throw a band-aid over, right? To your point, the validity period is going to continue to shrink rather,
Yeah.
and the volume of these machine identities to manage is only going to continue to grow, right? Both internal and external, right? So it definitely couldn't agree more. It definitely pays to do your research and make sure you're investing in the technology side of the house that's going to give you the keys or the tools you need to not only take care of the problem today, but be able to take care of it, tomorrow, next year, what have you. And that's not going to be something that can be addressed with human hands or, to your point, disparate scripts tied to different types of, platforms, technologies, devices, things of that nature. It's just too large. I would argue it's already beyond that. Um, so, with all that being said, obviously we've talked about a lot of different things, right? Is there anything that you feel is critically important for anybody on the call or anybody who, listens to this or sees this in the future to consider as part of this challenge, right? Is there anything that we haven't discussed yet that you think everybody should have top of mind?
Um, I think customers think, oh, I don't have enough certs, I don't need to worry about it, right? It doesn't matter whether you have one cert or you have 1,000, right? It's important to protect your business, reputation and revenue streams, right? And so I think you have to go into that mindset is this is something that I need to do for my organization, and regardless of how many you have, right? You need to figure out a way to take that off your plate and work smart, not hard. I think, that's a motto that I don't want to say I try to live by, but working smart is the way to do it instead of throwing. I mean, I spoke with one customer. I'm like, if you're not going to buy the solution, what are you going to do? He says, well, I'll just work more hours. I said, that's not the answer, man. He's a retired army guy, so he said, well, I'll just throw more man hours at it. Okay, that works for a short while, but that's not the long-term solution, right? And so you can't have that mindset. You got to figure out how can I work smart, and leverage the technology that is available, to make me look good and make sure my business doesn't fail.
No, that's
So,
that's absolutely fair. And I'm a retired Army guy myself and have learned the hard way in the past that just throwing more man hours at a problem only results in more scars and stories, but not necessarily
sure.
success, right? So that's a very, very fair point, right? Is that organizations can't look at themselves and go, "Meh, I'm not big enough for that to be a problem," right? It's a problem for everybody. Just like non-human identity in general is, machine identity in general is a problem for everybody. It doesn't matter what size the organization is, especially if you are even small organizations are stepping into automation more. Even small organizations have, generally an internet facing footprint of some way, shape, or form, and I would argue that small organizations generally don't have the kind of tools available to them with cyber insurance and things of that nature to be able to withstand or endure a breach as well, or even a revenue restricting event like their website going down. So I would almost argue it's at least as critical for smaller organizations or for those organizations that think they have a small footprint, just in a different way, right? Or from a different direction. But ultimately it's a shared challenge, regardless of industry, regardless of size, regardless of even current cert count, right? Which I would challenge most organizations to be 100% confident on that cert count as well, right? Just like
Yeah.
the other non-human identity, it sprawls and people are operating at the speed of business. And any identity related challenge generally involves some at least 10 to 15% ambiguity because of people feeling empowered and going and provisioning identities in ways that are maybe unnatural from a security perspective, but maintain the op tempo from a business perspective, so it's allowed, right? So, um, obviously, Tony, this has been a phenomenal conversation. One of the things that I wanted to do, towards the end of time here is open up the floor a little bit to anybody on the call that really wants to, ask any questions of us or, things of that nature. Or again, Tony, if there are any other points that you feel are important to make that we haven't touched on yet, definitely want to make sure that we include that as well.
No, I think we've touched on a lot. Obviously we could probably go on and on and on. It's a good conversation, James. Um,
Yeah, endless.
yeah. But I don't want to, come up on the top of the hour. So if anybody has any questions, I think I've said my piece for today.
Yeah, it's totally fair. Same.
Um, we got a quiet group today, which is not surprising.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's an intimidating challenge too, right? It's an intimidating subject. But Garen, when we look
Yeah.
at something we touched on earlier, the skill set scarcity, right? So there's a whole lot of people that know this is a problem, but maybe don't feel confident talking about it too. So one thing I'll just
Mhm.
throw out to everybody on the call is that if you have questions, but you don't want to throw them out into the kind of zeitgeist, so to speak, feel free to reach out to us, right? We're happy to talk about this, obviously. And we represent a significant group of people with a background in this that are certified in the technology, that have worked with, this challenge in the past and have the scars to prove it too. So I encourage anybody listening, if you have questions but want to ask them in a more private manner, that's completely okay. Feel free to reach out.